Dogs, they are considered man's and woman's best friend, and the beagle breed is especially sweet-spirited and quick to forgive. In this two-part special report, I take a look at how those traits have made them more likely to be used in medical trials and how that research translates to humans. A greeting among two dogs. Their eager tails wag back and forth like a metronome keeping time. The unquestionable sign of happiness. But this isn't the first time these two beagles have met.
Oh my God, this is so sweet.
In fact, it's a reunion.
We don't know what was done with them. We don't know what was given to them. We don't know anything about what happened before the day we met them.
They were rescued in 2020 after spending 7 years being tested on in a San Diego research lab. Once known only by a series of numbers, their new families named them Moritz and Theo. Mike and Sarah Klitzing say that Beagle's forgiving spirit is also their curse.
They generally like to be handled, so that's kind of weaponized against them because they will cause the least amount of problems for the people doing the testing. He's got his lab number tattooed on the inside of his ear.
This dog, who has been tested on for 7 years, is letting me hold him as a stranger, letting me touch his head, completely trusting. While most people are not surprised that animals are used in research, what most don't know is that nationwide nearly 60,000 beagles per year are bred and used specifically for that purpose. Recently, advocates and others have shined the spotlight on San Diego-based pharmaceutical company Crinetics. The company contracts with Innotiv, a lab in Indiana that is performing toxicology studies on 80 beagles.
The docile nature of beagles is what makes them, the victim here.
Kathleen Conley is a former animal researcher who now works with the National Humane Society. She says the organization conducted a 7-month investigation at Innotiv and produced undercover video. She talks about a particularly wrenching part of the video involving a dog named Riley.
The veterinarian was called to come in, and because of how bad a condition he was in, and the veterinarian wasn't able to make it because of personal reasons. So the animal suffered overnight on the floor, just moaning and groaning. And, I've worked on this issue for a really long time. I've seen a lot of disturbing videos, but that just hearing that animal groaning like that, I've never heard anything so awful.
Innotiv released a statement saying it complies with all regulations and its Indiana and Maryland facilities are accredited by the Association for the Accreditation and Assessment of Laboratory Animal Care, known as ALAC. Nonetheless, protesters backed with a petition of more than 250,000 signatures are calling for the beagles to be released for adoption.
They've locked the doors, they're not letting us in.
In other states, adopting dogs from lab studies is becoming law. In 2019, 32 beagles were rescued from a lab in Michigan. One of those beagles, named Teddy, inspired an adoption bill in that state called Teddy's Law.
He's number 364.
And other states, seen on this map in green, passed laws in recent years requiring that dogs are offered for adoption once research is completed. In May, a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers from 32 states signed a letter to Crinetics and Innotiv asking for the puppies to be released instead of euthanized. Officials at Crinetics would not agree to an interview, saying a number of their employees have received personal threats. In a statement, the company said it's conducting clinical trials on potentially life-saving treatments for babies and young children, and has no choice but to use autopsy tissue samples from animal trials. And it says until the FDA changes its requirements, there are no alternatives. The FDA would not comment specifically about the Crinetics study, but said euthanasia is not required after study completion unless it's necessary to examine tissue. While the attention Crinetics and Innotiv are getting is unusual, animal testing labs are not. In fact, the USDA website has a search tool that shows which species are used by each lab and how many of the animals were in studies involving pain, distress, or pain-relieving drugs. KPBS observed the exterior of 3 of these local labs that reported using dogs. The buildings are mostly obscure. At one of the sites, a lab technician taking his morning break was willing to talk to us about the testing that he has done.
Pigs and dogs and all kinds of species.
Brian Martin has been working at this lab for 5 years and says the animals here are well cared for. He goes on to say from what he has seen, that isn't true for all labs.
If I'm doing it, I know what I'm doing. The animal's going to be okay. If somebody else is doing it, they might not have as much care for the animals as we do.
I ask him what it's like to test on companion animals, like dogs.
It's tough. it's tough, but like we don't euthanize the dogs when we're done with them. We wash them out and then we reuse them.
What does that mean? Wash them out and reuse them?
So like we'll give them a drug, and then we will, take like blood time points, let's say, for 3-4 days. Then we'll just let them sit for like 2 weeks back in their pen, and then we'll reuse them again on study. Some of the dogs we've had for like 7-8 years.
And after the dogs have spent half their lifespan in the labs, he says they are adopted out to homes, sometimes by their own clients. Meanwhile, as the fate of the beagles in Indiana hangs in the balance, 4,000 beagles are in the process of being rehomed after a facility in Virginia owned by an innovative subsidiary agreed as part of a settlement to relinquish them after allegations of multiple welfare violations. Some of those dogs have been brought to San Diego for adoption. In part 2 of this story, we'll look into the current state of science and the regulation when it comes to animal testing, and how that research translates to humans. Maya Trabulsi, KPBS News.
You're such a good, sweet girl.
Throughout history, animals have been used in research, playing a major role in the way we find safe treatments to ease human suffering and prolong our lives.
We're not rats, it's quite clear. But there are biological parallels between species. I'm Tony Yaksh. I am professor in anesthesiology and pharmacology at the University of California, San Diego.
He says the COVID-19 vaccines are perfect examples of how animal trials paved the way for an urgently needed medication.
And that first injection in the arm did not occur let's just try the first person who wants to volunteer. A tremendous amount of work had been done with the animal models to, in fact, show that there was no adverse events.
But are animals the only option in the year 2022? A growing number of experts are saying no, especially when it comes to companion animals like dogs. In a statement to KPBS, the FDA says it's important to select an appropriate model for particular exploration, and sometimes the best model for a study is a dog. In San Diego, the issue has taken on a greater urgency. A San Diego-based pharmaceutical company, Crinetics, is currently using out-of-state lab Innovative to test its new drug on 80 beagles. The Humane Society released undercover video of the testing, saying it believes 32 of the dogs have already been euthanized, asking for the rest to be released for adoption at the end of the study this year. Both Crinetics and Innovative issued statements to KPBS saying they are acting lawfully and ethically. Crinetics says it follows strict guidelines and requires its contractors to do the same.
For those dogs that are still safe, are still alive, are still healthy, there's no regulation that prevents them from being adopted out.
Dr. Aisha Akhtar is a neurologist and public health specialist who worked at the FDA for 10 years.
By ignoring the suffering of animals, we create conditions that cause our own suffering.
She contends that animal testing is too unreliable and outdated to really give us answers.
Despite the fact that the Food and Drug Administration will require all new drugs and vaccines to be tested on 2 different species before moving into human clinical trials, 90 to 95% of all the drugs and vaccines that pass all those animal tests that are found safe and effective in those animals end up not working or are unsafe once they get tried in humans.
Saying 90-95% is misleading.
Dr. Joseph Garner is a professor of comparative medicine at Stanford University. He says the issue is more nuanced.
The vast majority of drugs entering human trials fail, but for other reasons. And I deeply believe that we can improve the translation of animal results into humans. But at the end of the day, there are just certain things that you have to do in animals, but we can reduce the number.
And Congress is poised to make it easier for the FDA to allow for more non-animal options. The FDA Modernization Act of 2021 aims to allow for more alternative methods like cell-based assays, organ chips, and computer models.
It doesn't take away animal testing, but it allows drug developers to start using more modern, human-relevant testing methods in place of animal testing.
We can do better when it comes to preclinical test methods and apply 21st century strategies that rely on human biology. Not so much on beagles.
It passed the House in June and is now before the Senate. Back at UCSD, Dr. Yaksh says if there is a way to replace animal testing, pharmaceutical companies would be inclined to do it, especially from a financial standpoint.
Researchers, scientists, people in drug development, they're not stupid. If you can show a better way to develop a drug and a molecule to to treat that patient, that SMA patient, that Huntington's chorea patient, that Alzheimer's patient. If you can show a better way to do it, bring it on, because I promise you, people will be beating your door down.
I asked Dr. Yaksh to view the undercover footage taken by the Humane Society. Though the video was edited down and could not be watched in its entirety, he said from what he could see, it looked like standard practice.
The oral intubation looked fine to me. And to be quite honest, the technicians were very sympathetic and caring of the animals, I thought.
I asked Dr. Lawrence Hansen to view the same footage.
This is as good as it gets for these animals. There's nothing unusual about this. I'm a board-certified neuropathologist, anatomic pathologist, and clinical pathologist, but I need to make it absolutely clear I'm not speaking for the UCSD School of Medicine. I'm just speaking for me.
Hansen, a member of several animal welfare groups, speaks from an ethical viewpoint. He protested against the use of dog testing at the university almost 20 years ago.
It seems particularly egregious to use dogs for animal research, for vivisection animal research, because dogs and humans have a history that goes back 15,000 years. We produced an animal that is hardwired to love us, and beagles are particularly easy to take advantage of.
Did you, in your time as a student, test on animals?
I didn't test on them. I did something worse than that. I killed 2 dogs. I killed one dog in a physiology lab when I was in medical school, and I tortured slowly to death another dog when I was in a surgery clerkship where they wanted us to practice surgical techniques on dogs. It's a karmic debt that I can't pay back.
As for the dogs that do make it out of labs and into families, what is clear is their capacity to forgive for whatever they may have endured in the name of helping humans. Maya Trabulsi.
You saved them.
KPBS News.